Imagine you have decided to research California wildfires and their effects on the local environment.
In this video, you will review different sources of information
and consider how the author's relationship to the source can help you categorize it as primary or secondary. Newspaper articles. You found several newspaper articles about the effects on wildlife from the California fires. If you want to analyze how the media reported on the fires, a newspaper article would be a primary source. But if you're writing an investigative piece about how wildlife was affected, a newspaper article would most often be a secondary source. Sometimes newspaper articles include first-hand eyewitness accounts. When first-hand accounts are the primary focus of an article, such as when an interview is published, the article would be considered a primary source. Journal articles. Deciding whether a journal article is primary or secondary is not always a straightforward process. When considering journal articles, it is important to understand the author's relationship to the information. If an author of a journal article did not directly examine or gather data, or if they did not create new data through their analysis, the article would be considered a secondary source. The image provided shows an example of a journal article that is a secondary source. The authors here are writing a summary of the lessons learned from wildlife response to Australian bushfires. These are not their personal observations and experiences, but rather an analysis of a past event that does not create new data. Similar to news articles, if you plan to investigate how experts discuss the impact of wildfires on the environment, journal articles would then be considered primary sources. Empirical research articles. Empirical research articles provide information that is based on observation or experience. This type of research is considered primary because the researchers are direct observers. Empirical articles will often use the following sections to communicate their findings: Introduction, Literature review, methodology, results, discussion, conclusion, and bibliography or references page. The image provided is of an empirical journal article. The authors in this case directly observed how recent wildfires affected the skin microbiota of North American terrestrial salamanders. They report their findings and conclusions in this article, making this a primary source. Personal experiences. Personal experiences are considered primary sources based on the proximity of the individual to the event. For example, someone who lived in a community directly affected by the California wildfires would be considered a primary source. You may oftentimes find direct quotations attributed to individuals during news interviews or even a reproduction of a document within an article. For example, you may find an article that references California Senate Bill 901, which explains the liability of utility companies during wildfires. The article may provide wording directly lifted from the Senate bill itself. The article is still a secondary source, but a copy of the Senate bill itself would be a primary source. Remember, primary sources can be reproduced whole or in part within secondary sources. Your research question will help you determine whether a source is primary or secondary. While some sources may be straightforward to identify, other sources may require you to think more deeply about the author's proximity to the event to determine if it qualifies as either a primary or a secondary source.